Letter to a most serene prince of a high princely house of the German Empire, in which is treated of the great Hermetic secret, the Philosopher's Stone, written by Johann Ferdinand von Frydau. 1762. Most Serene Prince, Most Gracious Lord, etc. Your Highness's invaluable letter of May 24, 1758, was duly delivered to me in its time. It gave me the deepest joy, for I was once again honored by such a lofty hand, yet it also caused me no small distress, as I had to learn that my letter of February 20, 1747, sent to the late Duke Ernest August of Saxony-Weimar, had come into your Highness's hands in the original, of which I had much rather believed, since I humbly requested it, that it had long since been revised and consumed by fire. I wish very much that this letter, together with its copies, could be recovered, but since, as I perceive, this will scarcely be achieved, I leave to divine providence what shall come of it. Your Highness will have observed therein, as can in no way be doubted, that, along with a compliment for the treatise which this blessed Duke himself composed by his own hand and sent to my humble person for review, 4 subjects were treated, namely: 1. Concerning the generation of metals. 2. Concerning Mercury. 3. Concerning the first matters of all things. 4. Concerning the great work and its preparation. These 4 subjects are the main objects and matters of the necessary knowledge of the deeply hidden mystery, without which understanding it is altogether impossible to have a clear conception or to obtain anything fruitful therein. Since now your Highness has this letter in hand, it gives me occasion to unfold further from it and to show how to proceed. Therefore, with gracious permission and freedom, I will, while setting aside all questions presented elsewhere, refer myself to it, as in it lies the whole connection of the Hermetic work, what serves for its understanding and what depends upon it. First, however, it is my duty humbly to thank your Highness for all the gracious favors shown me, with the heartfelt wish in return, that God may preserve your Highness in all well-being and overwhelm you with every heavenly blessing. As for her Hermann Fichtold and Baron Mainstasses, not Munchauses, touchstone of chymical writings, this was newly published already in 1753, with the first class improved and enlarged, and to the second was added the register of sophists, though with omission of the listed speaking persons and of the author's address, as he considered this superfluous, since whoever was concerned with it could make use of the first edition. This author has also prepared a supplement to the touchstone, which may be brought to press. It is just as substantial as the touchstone itself. The good man, however, will receive but little thanks from many, though the work is priceless, as it plainly indicates which books are useful or harmful to a lover of the art, so that he need not burden himself with a superfluity of books. Thus, whoever truly cares for the truth may procure this noble jewel. But it is not given to all men to believe the truth, rather, many must, for their unbelief, walk upon the broad road and spend their life days on the long rope of sophists, being of the foolish opinion that the adepti were envious, rejecting the good authors and recommending the bad. But these are weak-brained people, inclined to think and speak evil. I am certain that a cobbler over his blacking, and a bookbinder over his paste, is far more grudging than an adept over his secrets. Indeed, an adept esteems it an honor and joy when he can speak with men of merit concerning this art. But the aforementioned weak-brained cannot endure it when a great possessor of the art says that all the tinkering and laboring with particulars to make silver and gold is in vain without the great universal. They will and cannot believe that this is the costly truth, though they see plainly that all the chymists who busy themselves with it remain in poverty, and not a single one prospers. Therefore, such must learn through experience what the truth is. As to what your Highness mentions concerning Elias Artista, this serves by way of information. It is a history that requires a prophetic spirit, and much could be said of it, but it enters into hidden matters. My unworthy thoughts on it I have partly composed some time ago and set forth, when I annotated the Rosicrucian Confession, which Johann Valentin Andrea published in 1615, I prepared it with notes for a new edition. There it is said that this Elias Artista has, according to the testimony of Scripture, already come, but that he will also appear again in the time of the Church, as many godly men have written of him. The prophet Isaiah, chapter 22, verse 24, says of him that he is Eliakim, who shall come from the north, a hero clothed with power from on high and with the Spirit of God. Your Highness may please to read further in Wolff's Memorialia, and also what Emperor Sigismund, in 1403, caused to be inscribed in golden letters upon 2 tablets in the church at Pressburg in Hungary for a special remembrance. You are indeed a forerunner of him who shall come after you. He is a priest, through whom God shall work much. He shall be called Friedrich of Langnau. None shall withstand him. He shall bring God's order into force. Lords and cities shall obey him. God has tested him in many ways, with much affliction. He has been found in all things patient, therefore God will regard him, and through him reveal the glory of God, etc. Likewise Hugo, in his marginal glosses on the biblical text, as printed at Berlinberg, Volume 4, page 148, says, Cyrus was but a figure of that mighty hero who shall appear yet in the last and at the end of the Church's time, and who shall be raised up by God, upon whom so many prophecies are directed. Joachim of Albas says, There shall be raised up a valiant man, greater than all princes, who shall renew the service of the Church and destroy the Antichrist. Whether this is to be applied to what Paracelsus says, that before the end of the world one shall come under the name Elias Artista, who shall reveal and teach to the whole world the hitherto hidden arts and secrets, this I leave to those who have greater insight than I. But it is certain what John the Baptist says, Elias, Artista, upon whom the world hopes, has already long since come, he has already long been born and appeared in this world. But the world has not recognized him, nor wished to receive him, because he has not revealed the deeply hidden secrets as they desired. They do not wish to seek this sanctified and therefore deeply hidden wisdom at the true fountain of living water, but rather at shattered and stinking cisterns, yet it comes from God alone and is given by God, being a gift of God, and cannot be attained without God's providence. Nevertheless there are men who wish to compel such power through their own wisdom, that is, by speculating and laboring, but it is the Spirit of God who gives to our spirit strength, power, wisdom, and testimony, and teaches us all that is useful, needful, and salutary. We have an example of this when Moses says in his 2nd book, chapter 28, See, I have called by name Bezalel and have filled him with the Spirit of God, and to all who are of a wise heart, I have given wisdom into their heart. Now, that I may come nearer to my purpose, and fulfill my promise, I say, it is very good that your Highness has practiced metallurgy, for this is in part the first step and gate, the nearest and most natural way to attain a thorough knowledge of this high science, to know how minerals and metals grow in the earth or mountains, since the Hermetic work has in part a like direction. Without a true physical and metaphysical knowledge of the generation of metals, no one can become a deeply founded Hermetic philosopher. Yet, not easily will one who has studied metallurgy of himself attain the goal of this great mystery, since many, through their physical and metaphysical studies, wander astray and search for the prima materia of this great work too deeply, as may be read in Count of Treves and Basilius Valentinus, not perceiving that the prima materia of the philosophical work is none other than the first matter of all things, with only this distinction, that nature in the earth brings it into an essential form, but the artist must take it as an essential thing. For God the Lord has made and brought forth all from nothing, as Scripture testifies. He has appointed the stars as the preservers of all things, so that through their operative power they must ever supply what the elements consume, and has ordained nature, that is, the operative power, as the steward of the whole natural kingdom, to bring all things into their proper form and being, and has given a stern command and eternal law, that each should produce its like, that every seed should bring forth fruit after its kind. This nature works in an invisible way and makes the invisible become visible. But man cannot bring forth anything without a seed, nor form anything without a substantial thing, for God has reserved to himself the power that no one besides him can make something out of nothing, so that we may recognize his great wisdom and omnipotence through his works, and walk before him in deepest reverence. To man, as a substantial creature, it has been given to work in substantial things, and just as nature works in the earth, so must the artist seek to promote his work upon the earth, only with this difference, that nature makes her operation through the mineral, that is, the cold subterranean fire, but the artist through a material fire. Thus the artifacts can in a short time bring to completion what nature cannot accomplish in 1,000 years. Yet the artifacts cannot use the same things, i.e. principles, which nature employs in the earth to form metals and minerals, any more than nature can employ the things which the artist uses in his work to form metals and minerals in the earth, even if they are in part related and have similar effects. Although mercury is a moisture, sulfur an acid, and salt a dryness, yet none can take the place of the other, nor perform the other's function, except what God has assigned to it. For nature, by means of the cold subterranean fire, causes the mercury, that is, the heavenly sal nitri, the sulfurous acid, in the earthly nitrous dryness of the stones and rocks as well as in the cavities and subterranean hollows filled with every sort of earthy, exhausted clays, to become coagulated and fixed, so that it expands in its growing and thickening form like a fruit in the mother's womb. For the mercurial sal nitri is a moist vapor, the sulfur, that is, the acid, a fatty vapor, and the earthly sal nitri a dry permanence. The principles, however, which the artifacts uses as the components of metallic bodies, and by the material warm fire causes the living mercury, mercurius vivus, or astral spirit, and the vitriolic acid in the fixed salt, that is, metallic gold, to become coagulated and fixed, are such that from them a running quicksilver, mercurius vivus, can arise, so that it becomes a metallic substance of great value and power. For the mercurius vivus is a fiery spirit and thickening astral salt, the acid, or vitriolic sharpness, is a sal acidum, and the fixed salt is a body composed of cold and dryness. This dry part must therefore be made fusible, that is, fluid, by means of the sulfur and mercury, per stratum super stratum, which takes place when they unite and incorporate themselves in their center, while the necessary strong fire burns off the uncoagulated parts and separates them from the fixed ones. The alkaline dryness is the center in the mountains, where mercury and sulfur reach their end, cease from working, and come to rest, just as the salt is like the great ocean, in which all water streams die and cease to be. Further, salt is an attracting matter, and by means of its alkali, the death of mercury and sulfur. For, as Aristotle says, the spirits must suffocate in the dryness, since the inner part of all three is related, namely, a gold about to be fixed, which impregnates and concentrates itself together, and thus conjoins in the alkaline dryness. But mercury is a very volatile being, of heavenly fiery nature, always tending to return to whence he came, and hard to hold. He also carries in himself an alkaline, that is, a fixative, salt, which is mostly carried away and borne off with him, unless it be bound and fixed by its opposite, the dry alkali. Hence God the Lord, in the beginning, created and ordained that there should always be an active and a passive, and that the active should rest in its opposite, the passive. Thus mercury is the active, and dryness, salt, the passive part, which work together and unite so that they cannot be separated, but out of two become one. Sulfur, the acid, the universal sharpness, which is the mediator between mercury and salt, inasmuch as it bears equal affinity to both, and therefore is called the key to them, can by its expanding and diffusive nature unite with the alkali, and by its liquidity associate with mercury. Thus it disperses and spreads itself so that it is found even in the smallest parts of bodies, like the blood in man which circulates into the outermost members, bringing life, soul, that is, sensation, into them, and preserving them from dissolution. Therefore this acid is also called the copulator of the contrary parts, without which no metal or mineral can come into being in the mountains. This is the true metallurgy and mining science, both of the metals generated in the mountains and of the metals produced upon the earth. This science, though here mentioned in few words, can be extended at great length, but since your Highness already understands metallurgy, this may be sufficient. It would also be superfluous for me to go into the special particulars of how each metal or mineral receives its being, since they all have the same origin of birth, and differ only in that one possesses more or less of the essential principles, something that can be sufficiently seen in the books written on the subject. Yet it is not enough merely to know how and from what metals and minerals are generated, one must also learn to understand what part the external elements contribute and perform therein. Firstly, the earth, in which the metals are generated. The earth is an element in outward nature, a substantial visible body, thick, dark, opaque, coarse, and heavy, which, according to the book of creation, came forth from the water, and according to the reasonings of the wise, is a slimy moisture and a salty mass. Thus, earth and salt can in some sense be taken as the same thing, at least when generally spoken of. Otherwise, earth is the combustible body from which a salt is to be drawn. The earth is the counterpart of heaven, the matrix that receives heaven's seed, that is, the heavenly sal nitri, the sal salstre, and is impregnated by it. She is the mother and bearer of all minerals and vegetables. She is the preserver and nourisher of all creatures that have their life in the air and their root in the earth. The cause of this is that within her is the sal alkali, of which Christ says, "Salt is a good thing." But it is not salt alone, there is also sulfur, the acid, the soul, which is the life of the earth. This has its origin from the ether, though its affiliation is from the elements of the upper region, which cast it down into the earth, where it ascends and descends in mountains and soils until it unites with the alkali, coagulating in its porous parts, becoming thickened and fixed. From this the alkali is built upon, the soil made fruitful, stirred, and the products driven forth. This acid is the germ, the greenness, the growing power of all things. When this coagulation, conjunction, and fixing take place, then the first foundation for the becoming of a metal is laid. Secondly, water, as the second element and essential substance in outward nature. Water is a matter moist, flowing, and volatile, which, although it is only one, can yet on account of its properties be distinguished into three kinds, as Hermann Fichtold has noted in his Azoth und Igni. Water has two extremes: first, that it is a liquid and moist substance, and second, that it is a vehicle and vessel of the properties and powers it carries, especially of the metallic, mineral, stony, and saline seeds, which it bears with it and lays down at those places where its matrix is, as a hen lays down her eggs. There it is filtered, purified, and at another place wells up like the clearest spring water. The first water we shall consider is rainwater, which is without doubt the source of the others. For it is plain that when it does not rain for a long time, the wells greatly dry up and the streams diminish, but when it rains heavily, the former double and the latter grow rich in water. Rainwater forms itself in the clouds, by means of the vapors from the waters of the earth and mountains, which, when they rise up, carry with them sulphurous, nitrous, and arsenical spirits. When the storms of the wind stir the clouds under the hot rays of the sun, thunder, lightning, and hail result, and these are drawn down into the region of the earth. And when such waters or hail are collected, preserved until putrefaction, and then separated from the parts they carry by the art of separation, strange phenomena occur. They carry with them a very beautifully colored sulfur and a fiery sal nitri, which, however, cannot be seen or captured by everyone. Spring water is formed mostly, as said above, from rainwater, and, according to the opinion of many authors, from the sea, where it runs through subterranean channels, circulating like the blood in man's body through the veins until it comes to its outflow. This water carries with it all sorts of mineral properties, especially alum, vitriol, salt, polar earths, and many others of like kind, though they are not easily separated from it. When this water has been brought to putrefaction and freed from its earthiness, it is not easily altered again. If it is poured upon the earth takes it to itself with greater eagerness than any other water, because it has mineral properties. It makes the soil lively and fruitful, so that it brings forth the best crops in abundance. Sea water is for men and beasts a most unpalatable water, for it carries within itself a great abundance of salt. If a portion of it is taken under the equator, it yields, with much difficulty, a coarse and unsavory salt. Indeed, there are many places in Africa and also in Italy where this water is drawn into specially prepared basins and evaporated under the heat of the sun, whereupon a large quantity of salt remains behind. This salt, when again dissolved with fresh water and coagulated with the conzoli, produces a beautiful salt, which is then carried in great trade to the West Indies and consumed for human necessity. Much more might be said concerning this salt. That the waters carry with them the seeds of metals, minerals, stones, and salts is evident from this: where no water flows, no such mountain growths arise, and where no water runs, neither herb nor grass springs forth. Water is the chariot upon which the seed and the formative power, as a growing force, are born and impregnated into the earth. It is the life of the earth and must preserve it from burning. Yet the seed of metals, minerals, stones, and salt can in no wise flow into the rocks and stones, nor be united with their alkaline earth, without water. For this seed has within itself a fixed, thick, and stone-forming property, and therefore it must be maintained in water, as in a thin and fluid substance, in its tenuity and dissolution, so that through it may be carried into its center, there to be fixed, to stand firm and become solid. Upon this effect being accomplished, the water withdraws and takes its course through the organs of the earth to another center, where it then wells forth as a clear spring. These seeds are coagulated by the vaporous, or so-called cold mountain fire, with their alkaline earth, because they cannot endure a strong fire, seeing that they themselves are inwardly fire. Were this to ignite, it would shatter its vessels into many thousands of pieces and, like quicksilver, sublimate away. Therefore, says Gregorius Bacco, it is good that the vessels be closed, like the mountains, so that the seed may not escape, and the earth be left dead and unfit. But the fire does not allow this in the beginning, so long as it has not yet reconciled itself with its earth. Hence water is most necessary, so that it does not so quickly ignite and separate itself from its body. For this reason, the seed must be in the water, and the water with the seed, and, as two extremes that are destined for one single end, they must be mingled and remain together. Second section. The second section of the letter treats of Mercury and its necessity. The well-disposed Abbot Synesius says of this matter, "Dear son, you must begin your work with Mercury. Nothing is more certain and true than this, as reason itself teaches. Yet it must not be the common mercury, such as one buys from the apothecary, which is itself a metal, and thus unfit for the dissolution of metals. Rather, it must be a mercury that is not a metal nor a mineral, but a spirit, and which has its origin from the mineral kingdom, otherwise, it cannot dissolve the metals, penetrate them, break them apart, and unite itself with them. For two bodies cannot act upon or enter into one another, but only adhere outwardly, and may at any time be separated again. Nature and art therefore demand an active and a passive, that is, a body and a spirit, which must not be alien or opposed to one another, but sprung from the same root, as Count Bernard teaches. That metals are the proximate matter of our stone is commonly assumed. Yet precisely thereby have many thousands of men ruined themselves, squandering countless sums of money. For although it is true that like produces like, he who wishes to reap wheat must sow wheat, yet it does not follow that metals are the proximate matter. For metals and minerals are not the mine of mines, but rather the fruit, a mountain growth, which, like fruit in the vegetable kingdom, has ripened in its season. In them the mercurial moisture, that is, the universal spirit, has coagulated, joined itself, and with them become a metal or mineral, so that it is no longer a spirit, but a body, no longer universal, but particular. The unavoidable necessity and the law of nature therefore require that we possess a mercury which is universal, which has never joined itself to any body, nor eaten itself to death upon strange nourishment, that it may, as a pure maiden, be given to Phoebus. And just as mercury cannot be drawn from dead metals, so also the alkaline earth is not taken from such metals, but from philosophical metals. For the sages warn and say that the metals of the vulgar are not the metals of the wise, the metals of the vulgar being costly and dead, whereas those of the philosophers are living, and to be had for nothing. They further declare that metals, so long as they remain metals, have no place in the work of the wise, for they are hard, and their elemental moisture is dried up. But when they are dissolved back into their first beginnings, then they are the metals of the philosophers, and can, as dissolvent and dissolved, mingle with one another like water with water, never again to be separated. Aristotle, in the 4th book of the Meteorologica, says, "Let the artists of alchemy know that the forms of metals cannot be changed unless they have first been dissolved into their beginnings. The reason is that they cannot mix in their seminal parts nor flow together in their inmost essence. The bodies must therefore be dissolved and transformed into water, else they cannot mingle as water with water. King Geber calls this mercury, from which our work must be accomplished, a water. The sages altogether affirm that it is a blessed water, the poisonous water, the very strong wine vinegar, the milk of virgins, and such like, for this alone perfects our stone, both the white and the red, without the addition of any other thing. Since the essence cannot be extracted from metals and minerals without a menstruum and fiery spirit, one must therefore seek only this menstruum, this fiery spirit or water. Yet from this very point has all sophistry arisen, for when the ignorant sought this fiery spirit, they fell into the most absurd follies, and made all kinds of strong waters and corrosive spirits, hoping thereby to dissolve metals. But not at all, rather they only ruined them, for the true menstruum has not the slightest resemblance to these corrosive waters. Can folly invent anything more foolish than what these men have done? They wished to prepare a lofty medicine, for men and for metals. This medicine was to be a universal, a cordial, able to draw man out of the pains of death and free him, yet they took metals and minerals which are poisonous, deadly, shortening life. They made menstrua of cruelly poisonous ingredients, with which they thought to dissolve metals and prepare this noble medicine. In the same way they attempted the tincture for the transmutation of metals. Could such men not perceive that their undertaking was sheer madness? If one desires to make something noble and excellent, a cordial, a medicine above all others, necessity requires that one employ things which strengthen the heart, which work upon spirit and life, which are balsamic and essential, and which invigorate the heart, not things which, given to a sick man who still has hope of recovery, would at once shorten his life. Thus, just as the matter to be dissolved is noble and excellent, so also must the menstruum of Mercury be noble and excellent. Count Bernard therefore says, the dissolvent and the dissolved must be of one essence and one power. Hermes speaks in like manner, blessed art thou, O form of water, who dissolvest the elements. The elements of the stone cannot be dissolved except through this holy divine water. The author Ritter Krieg says, the sages give it many names, sometimes they call it wine, sometimes water of life, sometimes vinegar, sometimes oil, and the like. Artephius says, our water dissolves gold and silver immediately and makes of them an indestructible oil. Ripley writes, this very menstruum is the blood of the green lion. Again, we make a precious water, with which we turn all bodies into oils, and this water we call the quintessence. The author Bastecher says, this water is the sole tool and instrument of nature, whereby one may naturally obtain the metallic seed, or the living gold of the sages, for the sulfur of the sages can be extracted in no other way than through its natural menstruum. Kunrath of Leipzig declares, our mercury is not the common one, how could this vulgar mercury be the mercury of the sages, as the universal master key of the metals? For through this alone comes the extraction, the improvement, the regeneration of the metallic tincture. It is the true fontina of Bernard, into which the king of the land enters and therein is rejuvenated. Thus this dissolvent is indeed a water, as all the sages testify, an aqua vitae, a water of life, which is a spark of fire, the Ruach Elohim of the Spirit of God. It is a breath of the triune God, a spark of the light of nature. Therefore it is also called a living mercury, a spiritus animatus of the wise, a holy spirit. Aristotle names it an ensouled sweat, which is both delight and water. Kunrath of Leipzig, soul and spirit, water and blood, for in our water lies the whole art, since it is a washing water, says the author of Ludus Purorum, an azoth, with which Latona, that is, the red stone, is made white and the books are torn, as Hermes says. Artephius, our water, or said vinegar, is a true vinegar of gold and silver, for it clings to them inseparably. Item, our antimonial vinegar is a twofold substance of mercury, one from antimony, the other from sublimed mercury. Eugenius Philolaethes in Euphrates, the philosophers have two mercuries or waters, the first is the spirit from antimony, and the other from the mercury of the philosophers Venus. Rosarius, you must have two waters, one white and one red. But the water of which I speak is that which descends from heaven, and the earth receives it with its moisture. The water of the earth is preserved with the water of heaven, and the water of the earth honors it for its service. Arnold de Villanova, there is a difference between the tincture of water and of oil, for water washes and purifies, but oil tinges and colors. Lullius, there is a twofold fire, namely a natural and an unnatural one, and it is composed of two things, horse manure and unslaked lime. Dauphinus, page 180. It is the oil which unites the lime and the water and brings them forth, and it is the water which imparts the tincture to the lime, and when the lime is formed, then the water likewise becomes formed together with it. This solvent or menstruum, or mercury, otherwise called aqua vitae, is a water, both in essence and in form, like a spring water or some other clear crystalline water, without odor, sharpness, or harsh power, like well water. Therefore Count de Marciano says that such is a phlegmatic aqua vitae, and yet not truly a phlegmatic water, but a water whose essence is of great power, the only one in the world and under heaven, by means of which all embryonic and immature sulfurs are naturally opened into oils and quintessences, with utterly disensouled bodies, to the highest astonishment, says Baron de Bruggenheim in his secret manuscript. The dissolving agent is a spiritual being, a heavenly spirit, a fire and spirit of light. The thing to be dissolved is that same heavenly, spiritual essence, which, through its force of motion, has descended from the higher region into the earthly realm, and which is a true fire and congealed water. Thus the sages possess a mercury, a mercurial water, which is a solvent, a menstruum, or a spirit, and a body which they wish to dissolve with it, namely, gold. These two substances, drawn out of one subject or root force, though different in their outward form and appearance, are nevertheless one and the same in essence and power. For if they were not of one essence, they could never act upon one another, because the spirit, being of a thin and fluid nature, drives its force and essence into the very innermost of the body, that is, the gold, and opens it from within. It unites itself with it, clings to it, and becomes with it a single being, both in form and essence. The body, the gold, meanwhile lays hold of the spirit and draws it into itself. It nourishes itself thereby and takes it into its body. Arnold, page 143, says, "Thus do some make out of a coarse thing a subtle one, that is, out of a body, a water, and afterwards out of the same a dry thing, that is, from the water, which is moist, an earth, a dry thing, and in this way we transform nature, making from a corporeal thing a spiritual, and from a spiritual a corporeal." Avicenna says, "In this way the sulfur of the philosophers is extracted from the body, and the argentum vivum is obtained from the same matter, pure, upon the earth." At last, this solvent, which has caused so much confusion in the public practice of alchemy, is none other than our mercury, and our mercury is the solvent by which we dissolve the metals, that is, the hard bodies by nature stiffened and tightly bound, namely, our gold, freeing them from their closed bonds, so that their soul, the true quintessence of all quintessences of nature, the coloring tincture, may shine forth. This solvent is a mercury or water, which we draw forth from the rays of the sun and the moon, as Hermes, the grandfather of all philosophers, teaches when he says, "The sun is its father, the moon its mother." It has the power, by means of these rays, to assail gold and silver, to transform them from their form into another, to convert them into a tincture and a medicine. In this science, the extraction of the mercury from the rays of the sun and moon, consists the whole secret, as the authorities cited have clearly shown. Yet according to the philosophical laws, to which I must hold myself, it is not permitted me to say more upon this matter. The third proposition. The third proposition of our letter, concerning the subjectum and first matter, about which so much criticism and disputation has arisen in the world, now follows. This subject is a very simple thing, a very humble subject, and although it is but a single thing from which the philosopher's stone is made, it is nevertheless universal and to be found throughout the whole world, as author Fader Hurt says. Gloria Mundi speaks, "It is known to all men, it is in the air, in the water, in the earth, on all streets and highways, in every house and with every person, whether young or old, rich or poor, in all things that may be named, nothing excepted or withheld, so that without it no creature can live, nor can creation subsist. It is the foundation of the whole of nature and creation, the bond by which the upper is joined to the lower and the lower to the upper. It is therefore called the foundation pillar of all nature. Although it is such a noble and glorious being, to which under heaven nothing can be compared, it is nonetheless unknown to most, even to the most learned in this world, and is regarded by them as something contemptible and worthless, mocked, derided, and trampled underfoot. It is thrown by miners onto the heaps and carried by maidservants to the dunghill, as Morienus, Hotnording, and many others attest. Yet it is a special and lofty gift and benefaction of God, for which every man ought to thank him with all his heart, that it is so common and despised, laid by God at the feet of all men, so that no one has cause to complain that one rank has an advantage over another, or that God has dealt with partiality, such that the poor, for want of means to pay, could not obtain it. This matter is the Spiritus Mundi, the Sal Salstre, the heavenly Sal Nitri, which so many, out of desire to obtain, have sought in vain. It has a twofold countenance, like that statue in Florence in Tuscany, which represents Mars and Minerva, that is to say, gold and silver, sulfur and mercury, man and woman, the moist and the dry, the volatile and the fixed, all from one root, as Count de Treves says. For the dry, firm, fixed body is our gold, which is indestructible and incorruptible. The moist, volatile, and pliable is our silver. These two are again reunited by art and by fire. The fixed is made volatile and the volatile made fixed, the spiritual corporeal and the corporeal spiritual, so that they can no longer be separated. Moses, however, teaches that the first matter of all things was water, that God the Lord called forth all things from the water, and from the earth, separated from the water, he formed them. Therefore, author Gloria Mundi says, our stone is a water, and our water is a stone. For this reason many sages have said that our stone is composed of the four elements, that is, from the four primary qualities, heat, cold, dryness, and moisture. For warmth worked upon cold, and from this arose sulfur. Then moisture worked upon cold, and from this came mercury. Further, cold worked upon dryness, and from this salt arose. These three, which had as yet no opposite before them, worked in themselves, and by their power generated water, asterisk. Asterisk, here we must not imagine essential things that can be seen, but metaphysical principles, which are like a weaving spirit, a most subtle soul, and an unformed salt, which have their origin in the will of God and the creative word of be, and thus came to be. Now, when they had generated water and thus had a counterpart, they engendered within it a fertility, a greasiness, a sliminess, and solidity, from which the earth, or salt, was formed. The ancient fathers taught that the first and last matter of all things is salt, so that when one dissolves and destroys the bodies of all three kingdoms by fire, they become ash and salt. Hence it follows that in the beginning they were salt. Therefore, in Psalm 33 it is said, the earth is full of the goodness of the Lord. And Christ says, salt is a good thing, Mark 9, though he had just said before, none is good save God alone. One reads in ancient histories that in former times salt was highly esteemed, and even divine honors were given to it. It was called the soul of the world, hence Anaxagoras, and with him many of the ancient Greeks, were led to believe that the soul of the world was a substantial efflux from God, or else that God himself, through special powers, as though he were essentially present, worked within it. Modern scholastics, however, brand these Greeks as foolish and ill-disposed for saying such things, but they betray themselves thereby, in that they have no understanding of what salt is, nor any conception of what these wise men meant by it. Thus, salt is an offspring of water, but water is itself an offspring of the four first working principles, which can be very easily proven through the secret philosophical science. For earth can be reduced into water, and water can be dissolved into vapor, and then the vapor can again be brought back into water, and the water into earth. This deserves further reflection, namely, how and why the earth, which has its origin from water, can be dissolved into water, and the water again transformed into earth, why water can be transformed into nothing else but vapor, which, however, remains always water. This vapor is now the prima materia and seed of all things, and cannot be reduced further back into its original beginnings, as Count Bernhard discusses at length. The essential salt of nature is, as has already been shown, the foundation of the whole of nature, the being of all corporeality, and the becoming. It is the firmness of all essential things. Therefore, when such things are dissolved through putrefaction and burning, they yield a salt, as Lullius, Isaac Hollandus, and Gloria Mundi say. From all created things of the world, a stone, that is, a salt, can be extracted, but this is not the salt of wisdom, much less the philosopher's stone. Gloria Mundi says, "Salt is rightly called the lapis philosophorum, for it resembles our stone, but it does not serve for our art. I have written this only so that you may better recognize our stone. Our salt is our gold," says Count de Marciano, "and it appears like salt, and in outer nature it has much similarity with it, because it comes from the same ore from which gold and silver are generated, and from which it also has its incombustibility and is called gold. For it contains the seed of gold within itself, the gold sulfur, which is called the gold of God. It has within it the silver of the sages and the salt of wisdom. Although indeed all things arose from the four elements, and the four active properties brought them forth, yet they are unequal in their powers. For in earthly things the elements have mingled themselves with them and have become bodies therein, as is seen in metals, where not the least trace of elementary moisture is perceptible, but rather, with the principles of the metals, have become metallic. In other things, as in vegetables, the elements have transformed into vegetative bodies and have become combustible within them. The same may be said of animals. But in the subject of the sages, in the Minera of the Minera, the elementary moistures are still unmingled and untransformed, and therefore remain pure and steadfast from the beginning, being a spirit, and hence also called the great world spirit, Spiritus Mundi, Spiritus Universalis, which still reigns in its spiritual essence uncorrupted and is thus to be obtained. Now, since it has been said that the elementary qualities in the metals and minerals have dried up and become mineral and metallic bodies, that is, mountain fruits, mountain plants, and mountain stones, such cannot be our subject. The matter or subject from which the philosopher's stone is derived is no metal or mineral, although it is found in metals and minerals. Rather, it is the Minera of Minera, a mineral essence and root of them. In vain does one suppose it to be lead, sulfur, and mercury, vitriol, and the like. This first matter, or universal spirit, is, as we have already said, a heavenly spirit, whose origin is from the heavenly region, therefore it is always heavenly and spiritual, that is, volatile. But this matter is not some extraordinary or rare substance that God the Lord has reserved and ordained solely for this high work. Rather, it is the general first matter from which God made all things that are made, and hence it is called universal. Yet, although it is universal, being in all things and the only one, it does not serve us from all things, but only from this our subject, for in it, it remains unmingled, still a pure virgin, not having united with anything else, and for the high work no other is required than this one pure essence. Thus all other things, in which this matter has mingled, cannot give that which they do not have. For how can a poor man make another poor man rich, or a land full of needy, exhausted, and weakened subjects pay their prince great revenues and expenses and thereby make him rich? Why should one believe that things which the fire consumes are suitable for bringing forth silver and gold? Metallic gold and silver are fixed and incombustible bodies, therefore, the things that are to produce silver and gold must also be fixed and incombustible. For what is combustible cannot protect another combustible, thus, something must be present that resists the fire and overcomes combustibility. How then should the five base metals and all minerals, together with all vegetables and animals, yield anything that can resist fire, since they themselves are combustible and cannot prevent their own burning? Conrad of Leipzig says, De lapide philosophorum catholico ac magno, the art does not at all consist in metals and minerals, but only in regard to the lapis specialis and the particular lunar and solar works upon the lower metals. Now, if the lower metals are to be transmuted into the higher, into silver and gold, they must surely not be transmuted by things that are consumed by fire, but by such as not only resist fire, but can also protect other things from it. This is effected through silver and gold, which must first themselves be improved, tinged, and exalted, through rebirth brought to more than perfection, sublimated and raised according to nature and art. Therefore, although metals and minerals do not belong to the lapis universalis philosophorum, they are nevertheless of immeasurable importance for transmutation. For just as they are the subject of transmutation, so too they are its truest substance, without them no transmutation can ever take place. The 5 base metals and all minerals are of the same blood as gold and silver, and only differ in that they possess less of the fixed spirit with which nature has cooked them, than the fixed metals. On the other hand, the 5 base metals and some minerals have more of the noble, coloring gold sulfur than gold itself, especially since gold has only so much of the coloring sulfur as is required for its state of being gold, and of which it can spare nothing. Therefore, those are greatly mistaken who seek particularia, that is, small tinctures of transmutation and augmentation, and attempt to make them from the common metals and minerals without the universal key. It is true, nothing could appear more plausible than that to exalt the metals, one must use metal, and draw their tincture from them, in order to transfer it onto others. And many have imagined that metals could be dissolved by nothing else but minerals, that is, by strong waters, since they must be closest in kinship to the metals and of the same blood. But nothing is more foolish under the sun than this. It is just as if one would wish to generate a man out of an animal, because some of them are found to possess certain special qualities beyond others. It is true that without metal, no metal can be made, but it is also true that it does not happen in the manner the common chemists imagine. They deceive themselves, but they might see this, if they would pay attention, since all those artists who walk this path fall into the greatest poverty, mockery, and misery, and in addition bring a bad name upon alchemy, as if it were alchemy's fault for their misfortune. The matter, the subject, which we use at the beginning of the great work is therefore, as has been said, a Minera of Minera, which is to be found everywhere, and for which we have no need to travel to the east or west, to cross the sea, or to descend into the shafts of the mountains, since these have no more power for the great work than iron shoe buckles, as Hervé Lebris says. Rather, each one finds it lying at his feet, and need only trouble himself to take it up. The fourth proposition. The fourth proposition of our letter concerns the preparis, of which Pythagoras says in the Tuba, our work requires at the beginning 2 natures of one essence. And Bernard Count of Treves says, our work is made from 1 root and 2 mercurial substances, taken raw from the Minera, pure and clear, joined together, and administered by fire as the matter requires, always cooked until from 2 they become 1. In this one, when they are harmonious, the body is made into spirit and the spirit into body. King Artiorg the Great, Caspar Hartung say, our medicine is made from 2 things of one essence, from other things it cannot be made. Count de Marciano writes, the art and practice, upon which all the wise agree, is that the dry must be united with the moist, that is, the volatile with the fixed and solid body, and indeed, that both must come forth from the same root and from the universal nature. Basilius Valentinus says, from 2 and 1 thing must it be drawn. These 2 substances, of which one is active and the other passive, must come from 1 thing, that they may be of one nature and one kind, so that they are not opposed in their working power, but as belonging together may advance one another. Just as earth and water are 2 elements, and yet must aid one another in bringing forth products, so also are these 2 substances, although they may outwardly appear contrary, nevertheless the things required for the building of the great work, and must produce the sought for effect. Albertus Magnus, in his book on the stones, says, since nature is both the beginner and the finisher of art, the artist must before all things understand well the origin and natural birth of the metals. Geber writes, he who does not understand in what manner the metals are born, and how nature proceeds in her intention with them, will never, even if he knows the beginning of the art, attain to this science. The reason is, as Aristotle holds, that the metals must be brought back into their beginnings. Thus it is necessary to know of what they consist and are composed, since they must be brought back by the same things, i.e. components, of which they were first made. The art also has no other principia than those same parts of which gold consists. Hence it is impossible that anyone should be able to open up gold without knowing into what parts it must be divided. One can certainly destroy and ruin gold, but to dissolve it into its components requires art and science. These components are the beginnings of the art, therefore the wise command that the artist should begin his art where nature has ceased to work, that is, at perfection. Though the wise say that our subject is imperfect, and that art must begin at perfection and work unto perfection, still they speak in contraries. For nature works toward perfection, as is seen when she brings all plants, minerals, and animals to the degree of their completeness. And although it seems to reason that nature ceases her working there, she does not in fact cease, but the same active force, by which she brought things to perfection, casts them into destruction and passes them through corruption into another form, and from this form arises a third. For destruction and corruption is the nothing or chaos into which all things return as into their beginning and origin, and through which they attain a new birth. This nothing is a raw moist water, and thus the seed of the first matter, into which all things are dissolved and from which they must again take their beginning and origin. Thus the proverb holds true here: one's death is another's life, one's decay another's resurrection, as daily examples show and prove. Your Highness may here say that we contradict ourselves in our writing, that what we lay down in one place as a foundation, in another we retract and reject. For we say of the metals that they are the nearest matter of the philosopher's stone, and that transmutation of the metals cannot happen without them. Yet again, we say that metals and minerals are unfit, since they have no radical moisture, etc. But your Highness will permit me to say that all this is no contradiction, but the pure truth. We have demonstrated clearly what metals can and cannot do, that they belong to transmutation, but not to the solution of our gold, which is our metal. For there is a very great difference between dissolving common metals and dissolving our gold into an irrevocable oil. The noble knight and canon Ripley says, each stone has its particular subject and also its particular operation. To one belong metals, and to the other belongs the minera of minera, that is, the root power. Hence has arisen the confusion, that the ignorant have not known how to distinguish between the universal and the particular. But we come closer to our aim, and show how, according to the teaching of Aristotle, the aforesaid metal, our gold, must, can, and shall be destroyed, radically dissolved from its bonds of hardness, and brought back into its first beginnings. We say dissolved and brought back into its first beginnings, because all common chemists, each for himself, have an arcanum to dissolve gold, but the greatest power of these is only to break the gold into very small parts, which are still always essential gold, or may become gold again. So that their dissolution is nothing but destruction, and thus not truly a dissolution nor a reduction into its beginnings. This they may as well leave off, since our solvens, namely mercurius, is unknown to them, that with which we dissolve our metal, our indestructible gold, into its true beginnings and first matter, that is, into a vapor and mist, and thereby volatilize its quintessence and tincture through sublimation. So long as this is not, and is not done, let no one believe that he understands the solution of the wise. Canglier Bucinus says, where the bodies do not become a vapor, you have accomplished nothing. Therefore, Hotnorthon says that solution is the key of the whole art, which is threefold. 1. The crude body. 2. The earth of the philosophers, and 3. Multiplication. But since that which is calcined can be more easily dissolved than what is uncalcined, it was necessary that calcination and the destruction of the sulfurous impurity and combustible parts of the body should first take place, and whatever might be used from corrosive waters or a menstruum must thereafter be removed, and no foreign element may remain. The philosophical fathers Hertz says, the natural calcination or burning of our natural matter is so essential and indispensably necessary to the work of the wise, that without it, it is altogether impossible to arrive at the composition of the stone. We perform our natural calcination and roasting for two reasons: first, that the combustible parts of the gross sulfur, which corrupt and spoil, may be dissolved and entirely separated from the fixed spirits which are calcined. These combustible parts, however, resist and defend themselves by their cohesive quality against their natural calcination in the fire. The second reason why we calcine is that we may dry out the volatile, watery, coagulating moisture which is bound with the fixed part in the root, and thus bring our precious matter, naturally, to the lime or salt of nature. Ripley teaches, calcination is a preparation for the necessary solution of our stone. Ritter Krieg, page 46. Take heed that the fire in the beginning separates the heterogeneous parts of our stone from each other, but unites the homogeneous parts together, so that the secret fire afterward does the same work. These few reasons are enough to show us that calcination is not only very necessary, but must precede all other operations, partly, that those parts which hinder our solution may be removed, and partly, that by our secret calcination the true essential moisture may not be consumed by our natural and unnatural fire, but rather increased, preserved, and maintained in its being. Although this calcination is not common, it is nonetheless most necessary in the work of the wise. It is not the common one found among the chemists, who in outward nature burn the corporeal parts and turn them into ashes, against which Ripley warns. Rather, it is the secret one, by which the spirits and volatile parts are brought into a docile state and transformed into a lime. It requires no great wisdom or science to turn bodies or substances into ashes by fire, since this is common. But to render the spirits and volatile parts docile, to bring them into a fire-resistant lime, that requires understanding and science. It is also necessary to know what docility is, what is combustible, and what is incombustible, likewise, what spirits are that may be fixed, and what spirits cannot be fixed. The docility that is incombustible, this is our gold, which cannot be destroyed without its radical moisture, but is a fire-resistant and indestructible gold. The docility that is combustible is the combustible part of the impurity of gold, namely the combustible sulfur, which holds together the hardening and binding of the fixed and volatile parts, and cannot be destroyed without calcination. The spirits which can be fixed are the ethereal, earthly, and saline spirits, which as invisible, intangible, and non-substantial spirits float in the air, and by their balsamic and essential quality make it healthful to all creatures and productions. The spirits, however, which cannot be fixed, are the mineral, immature, watery moistures which are very harmful to the work, and must therefore be separated from it, since in them no solidifying parts are found. After calcination follows solution, as the second stage of our great work, in which at the same time putrefaction, extraction, distillation, and sublimation are performed. There the dissolved parts, heavy and light, watery, oily, and dry, are separated from one another, the light parts rise upward, the heavy sink downward, and without this the noble essential qualities cannot be revealed. For this, however, a solvens or menstruum is required, of which much has already been said above, that it is an indispensable instrument. An anonymous author in his 1661 work printed at Kassel says that the metallic water or seed is a lunar juice, aqua vitae, a quintessence, which is of one essence with the tincture of gold, and therefore able to dissolve and open gold, for everything can be dissolved and brought back into that from which it first came. Hence this water is allied and related to all metals and minerals, for this water and gold are of one essence in their inward ground. Gold itself also has grown out of water, as Mercury has. Ritter Krieg, pages 40, 111, shows that this is their beginning, because within they have a hidden magnet, that is, a desire of love, a fire of love, through which they act upon each other and penetrate one another. Thus it comes to pass that one opens up the other inwardly, for the dry has a fermenting and coagulating sulfur, and the moist, as water, has a fermenting mercury. Or as Lullius says, in our matter there are two kinds of quicksilver, namely a fixed one in the ore and a flowing one that flees. Kangler-Buxton says, the water runs into the earth and is stretched out corporeally therein, it tinges the earth, then it departs from it and leaves its soul in the body, and the body is dissolved by means of the water. We see an example of this in rainwater, which opens and fertilizes the soil, but is absorbed by the earth. Mundus and the Tuba, through this governance the spirits are turned into bodies, and the bodies into spirits. Pythagoras in the practice, the earth is turned into ashes by calcination, the ashes into quintessence by sublimation, the quintessence into water by solution, and this into stone by coagulation. Mundus in the practice, our stone is made from water, therefore one must first dissolve all things into water. It is unbelievable that a thing can be brought by its nature into another form unless it is first brought into the matter from which it was first made. Aurora consurgens, this calcination is done so that the parts, which have been contracted and compacted by the fire, may again be moistened by the spirit, which is a dissolving fire, which remoistens what was burned, makes it spiritual, more subtle and thinner. Nididius, 254. The spirits, however, must be fixed with the water of the bodies. The bodies and spirits are also dissolved for another reason, namely, so that with the water of the spirit, the waters of the bodies may be united, coagulated into one, and made firm, so that they can no longer be separated from each other. Basilius Valentinus leads us further in his second key, where he teaches how to open gold and bring it back to its beginnings. He explains how the royal water, made from two contrary substances, saltpeter and vitriol, or better, from aqua fortis and aqua regis, should be prepared, as two combatants, where one must drive out the other, that in their duel they might reconcile and give health to the king, to beget children of infinite seed with his consort. This water is a mercurial, volatile, fiery spirit, a mineral force, a vitriolic moisture and an acid, akin to gold, of its very race and blood. Therefore it unites with gold and becomes one with it, for gold makes the water fixed, and the water makes the gold volatile, since their kinship and affinity, derived from their generative power and nature, bring this about. Each makes the other indestructible and protects it, for each dissolves the other, and in their inmost ground they are united, so that they can no longer be separated nor destroyed. Artephius calls this water a vinegar and says that it comes from antimony and mercury, therefore it increases the tincture and the weight of gold and silver. Basilius Valentinus, page 714, calls it a liquor-like essence or philosophical water, in which are contained and hidden all the elementary qualities, and above all the heavenly ones, to which the elementary and earthly are subordinate. On page 228 he calls this liquor a spirit of mercury, by which all metals and minerals, without any corrosive, can be opened, broken, and resolved into their first matter and reduced thereto, for it is the master key of all his other keys of the high art. The author Fader Hertz, page 202, says that this is the glorious key that unlocks the door to the stone, and that without it nothing can be accomplished in our secret art, and that there is no one in this great world who, with all his arts and sciences, would be able, without this reborn salt, the salt of wisdom, the dry, inimitable water, the sole key, to reach the great work or accomplish anything fruitful. The author Mercelier de la Croix writes, "He who has the essence of the mercurius vibi and the salt of the philosophers can prepare a perfect elixir and possesses the star of Mercury, with which one can transmute the lesser metals into red and white." Basilius Valentinus, page 759, says, "Without the spirit of Mercury, it is impossible to make the universal of the world from the figured body of gold alone, and it will remain impossible until the Creator ordains otherwise." On page 733 he says, "This white spirit is the true Mercury of the philosophers, which lived before him, and it will also live with those who come after him, as with those who live with him now, and without it, neither the stone of the wise nor the great mystery can be made, neither universal nor particular, much less any metallic transmutation, since this spirit is the key to unlocking all metals." Ferrarians, page 34. "If you possess it, you have found the salt of the wise masters and the incombustible oil, for this is the hidden secret of the wise, a salt and root of all things, a salt of all secrets, virtues, and properties, the true all-in-all." Abbot Synesius also says, "It is the soul of the world, and therefore to be found throughout the whole world, the true heavenly water of grace, the key of Hermetic philosophy, without which nothing can be done in this secret science. It is the root of the art, and the key that opens all locks and sealed gates, that makes the fixed volatile, and the volatile fixed, coagulates and seals them. Thus, the art and science of the wise consists in a vinegar. I say vinegar, or azoth, and to ferment it with the gold of the wise, that must exalt it in color and increase it in weight. Thus we draw from gold, the gold of wisdom, with this our vinegar, our mercury, its red soul, we purify it of its adhering impurity, and project it onto the silver of the wise, upon the whitened earth. We ferment it, that they may unite together and become the perfect indestructible gold. Thus we draw from the slate, the black quartz, the raven of the philosophers, the volatile gold with the mercury, that lifeless water, that phlegmatic azoth, which is our cabbage water, that seems to be without odor, taste, or strength, in which our gold dissolves gently and docilely, like ice in warm water. Thus we make the gold of God, fluid and volatile, and prepare it for its use. We cleanse it with the philosophical mercury and make it into a true aurum potable, known only to those who know how to prepare it, and not that aurum potable with which the boasters of vulgar chemistry so pride themselves, but the true one, which is made from our gold and by means of our living mercury. This, most illustrious prince, is the real science of all the philosophers ever taught in the world, that is, the true Hermetic adepts, the very matter that has caused so much stir in the world, about which so much has been written, argued, glossed, chased after, lied about, and deceived, that in the pursuit of it endless studies have been undertaken, many millions of money wasted, and many thousands of families, high and low, reduced to utter poverty and other pitiable circumstances. Yet it is also that science which is called the Great One, that which alone is the happiness of mankind, by which all men may be made most blessed. It is that great grace and beneficence of God, through which man is blessed not only in this temporal life with health, abundance of food, and worldly prosperity, but also by which he is made partaker of the one true felicity, for by it one truly learns to know God in his essence and in his works. She is that singular science which God the Lord, out of special mercy, grace, and love toward the human race, has appointed for all men, to make them blessed and to preserve them in blessedness, since after the meal of grace he has made all men capable, called them, and offered them blessedness, as your Highness will well understand me. She is furthermore that exalted science of which the author of the Philosophical Father Hertz, page 229, says, "This now, what I say, to prove, behold that, in granting you this science, God has in some measure made you like unto himself, in that he has not only created you in his own image, but also given you true goods which the earth itself, so to speak, contains. Through this wondrous science, he gives you the treasure of human health, and raises you, as it were, to be lord over the life and death of men, for by means of this science one can restore health, preserve it, and thus prolong life. Yea, the least that can be said of you is, that you are more than a king." This same author further says, "My son, will you, since you are somewhat more than a king, behave as Elijah did? Do you not see rather that you are bound to perform divine works, and to conform yourself to the will of God, who has bestowed upon you such exceeding grace, that he has thereby made you half a god? Thus, as Paracelsus says of it, it is the universal arcanum, as all philosophers testify, the highest treasure, such as is not to be found in this present world." Hermes says, "He who has this science has an incomparable treasure, greater than the wealth of kings and princes." Plato, "He who has this gift of God possesses the highest secret of nature, which surpasses all worth, and is an incomparable and most precious treasure." Rupertius says, "He is rich in infinite riches, above the kings and princes of this world. Senior and Gloria Mundi, it is a treasure above all earthly treasures, which neither kings nor princes are able to pay for." Solomon the Wise, "I held her dearer than kingdoms and principalities." And here I must confess myself but the least ABC scholar, and not even worthy to be named as such, for I have not penetrated to the wisdom of the sages, but only stood too long at the steps where the peaks of their wisdom rise forth. That is, I have tarried at the subject matter from which the so highly praised stone is made, before I could accomplish its true separation and reunion. I did not, like them, ascend further, even with the help of others, but only by the gracious guidance of God, thanks be given to him, have I attained some enjoyment, not by the writings of friends or by the books of the wise, but by striving through practical experiments. To know this subject from the ground up, what properties, virtues, and uses it has in its inner and outer essence, how the Mercury of the wise, which holds dominion therein, yet is bound by the elements and fettered by them, might be drawn out with the blood of its progenitors, this was a mighty obstacle to me. Yet I did not cease to dissolve it by solution, calcination, and distillation, to separate it duly into its parts, to prepare from it a mercury, a sulfur, and a salt, then to purify these from all excrements and separate them, and then to unite these two volatile spirits and fixed bodies together, to feed mercury and sulfur with their salt, to awaken the body from the grave with spirit and soul, to make the spiritual essence earthly, that is, corporeal, and the earthly and bodily essence spiritual and heavenly. Count Bernard says in his epistle, that the solvent and the solved must remain together, and from the two, from the male and female seed, a new species or form will arise. With truth I tell you, that no water by natural inclination dissolves a metallic species, except only this water which, by reason of its matter and form, remains with it and can again be coagulated by the dissolved metals. This union, of which the wise have indeed written much, but very darkly, and which constitutes the greatest secret in this science, has long hindered me from reaching the desired end. Yet not me alone, but all who undertake this toilsome voyage in pursuit of gold, for divine nature has, out of great care, so ordered it, that no one can pass through these perilous rocks, unless for a long time he be driven about among these dangers by the winds upon the cliffs, from one faith and hope of experiment to another. It is no small matter to reconcile two opposing, raging enemies, such as fire and water, and to establish a bond of peace, that one may find satisfaction in the other and yet each retain its natural dominion. Whoever cannot bring fire and water into one, so that they mingle together like two waters, like water with water, becoming indistinguishable, will accomplish less than nothing in this science. Thus the greatest effort lies in this, how the volatile may be joined with the fixed, and the fixed with the volatile, so that the fixed part may fix the volatile, and the volatile part may render the fixed volatile. This, then, is the whole knowledge and the whole art of the philosophers. Whoever hopes outside of this, is on the way to his own ruin. For my part, beyond this I have done little or nothing, since I regard all else as mere puppetry and as things which nature herself has rejected, and with which the wise ought to be ashamed to busy themselves. But here is passed over the true key of all keys to the entire realm of nature, by which alone all gates are opened, behind which the Lord God has laid up the great blessings and benefactions as treasures of the sanctuary, for the happiness and preservation of mankind. One must, therefore, strive most earnestly to discover and to obtain this deeply hidden key, for apart from it all is vain and but fly-catching, with which those occupy themselves of whom Christ said, that they will not enter by the true door into the sheepfold, but climb up some other way. Among such are many whose principles, maxims, and physical systems are deliberate fraud, publishing writings as if they were true adepti and masters of the art, whereas they understand not a jot of the true essence. Hence it follows that their undertakings are lies and deception, meant only to delude the ignorant, by which they bring a bad name upon alchemy, as though it were impossible or false. God grant that all high rulers would bestow upon such deceivers their deserved reward, then would true alchemy soon recover her former splendor. And there is reason to thank God, that he has not allowed this high gift to perish on account of such vain men, but has preserved it, and will still further preserve it, that the high brotherhoods of the sacred order of Aurum Solinum, Argentum Velum, and the golden cross salt, may remain adorned, prospering, and blessed in all places. Finally, most serene Prince, Albertus Magnus says, we join the volatile with the fixed. We place together the two solutions, of the elixir 3 parts, and of the broken body 1 part. Aristotle says, the water is Mercury and the broken earth, into which Hermes commands his seed, Sol and Luna, to be sown. Gloria Mundi says, our Sol and Luna are our grain, which we sow into our earth, but first as spirit and anima, and then, as father and mother, so are also the children. Therefore he further says, dear sons, disciples and lovers of this high art and science, now that you know what our stone, our earth, our grain, our meal, our dung, our green soap, our Sol and Luna are, you understand the whole masterwork. Now when we have thus composed and set together our confection, we tinge our body with a reddening tincture and make it fluid like wax. Hence it is in vain to labor to find the philosopher's stone without knowledge of the ingredients, just as it is vain to sow wheat without wheat and soil. Whoever does not know our water, which is the water of life, generated of sun and moon, whereby the wise dissolve their gold, separate its inner parts, and make it white, whoever works without knowledge of this matter, works only to his own harm and ruin. For the water generated of sun and moon, and separated from the body, must again and again be poured upon the body, until it is wholly purified and clarified, until the earth is clean, white, and like marble, and has drunk in and absorbed all the water. This is accomplished by the boiling of a subtle fire, as the sages teach, that one must boil and reboil the confection until it is white. Yet in such boiling not all the water is condensed and made stable, but only the noble parts, that is, those which become fixed and hard. The unquiet moisture, however, vanishes and departs. Thus say the Tubba and many other philosophers, one should every 8 or 10 days turn the boiling into a sublimation, that the bodies, hungry and thirsty, may again be fed with the nectar of the gods, by which the high work is much advanced toward its end. For this reason also is this high work called a work of women and a play of children, since it is nothing other than a continual washing and whitening, like the children playing in the streets, where now this, now that lies down and prevails. Count Travis says, "The man must rule over the woman and keep the upper hand." I must also say something concerning the vessel and the furnaces, about which so much noise is made by the ignorant, though they are but of little importance. There is but a single vessel, in which the matter is to be boiled, imbibed, coagulated, sublimed, calcined, and ground. It is shaped all around like an egg, thick, strong, somewhat high, with the top like a worn flask or dissolving dish, yet in such manner that it can easily be hermetically sealed crosswise with a linen cloth or paper, so that nothing may fall in, and yet the superfluous and coagulating moisture may evaporate. In this vessel the matter will duly coagulate, and no other vessel is needed. This vessel is in itself a poor and simple thing, only so arranged that a steady, enduring warmth may be maintained within it, and though it requires but little art to prepare, there is no need to say much more about it. Basil Valentine says, "He who has the right matter will also easily find an oven, just as he who has flour will easily find an oven to bake bread." Most Serene Prince. This is all that I know and understand, but it will, I trust, be sufficient to satisfy your Highness. From my heart I wish that all which has here been said may serve toward your Highness's intended goal, and I have the honor, with the deepest reverence and respect, to call myself Most Serene Prince, Your Highness's most devoted servant. Sonnenberg, the 14th of November 1758. Johann Ferdinand von Frydau. The End.